Hello everyone. You are looking at what is basically the entirety of my crystal collection. Sorry that it's all sort of clumped together and rather chaotic looking. I sort of have my camera propped up in a rather precarious position to try and get all of these in. The only things you're missing really are a bowl of small tumble stones to the side, and then I have an agate geode back in my parents' house, and maybe a couple of other little bits and pieces out there as well. I have been kind of mentioning crystals a little bit on Facebook, and if you've watched many of my videos with my altar in them, you might have noticed that I have crystals on my altar. I may have mentioned a couple of them once or twice as well in videos. But I've actually never gone into my views on crystals, how I use them, what they mean to me, anything like that really at all, ever here on the channel, or indeed really at all online. So I thought that I would take the opportunity to do so, particularly because two of these beauties that you see in front of you are actually quite new. I bought them when I was in Edinburgh 2 weekends ago, I think. This amethyst cluster here, and for size reference, there's my hand. It is fairly large, and this, I am told, is an onyx egg. It looks absolutely nothing like any other onyx I've ever seen, but I'm going to take their word for it. I got that in the Museum of Edinburgh, and it as well is, you know, it's quite hefty. I might say that is possibly my largest chunk of crystal that I own, apart from the geode. And that sort of inspired me to maybe talk about crystals a bit on the channel, show them off a bit, just because some of you might be curious, and yeah. Most of the people who watch my YouTube videos, I think, are kind of in the pagan community. You seem to largely consider yourselves to be pagans and witches. I know there are quite a few of you as well who have stumbled on my videos while looking for more information on pantheism and naturalistic paganism and that kind of thing. So there might actually be kind of contrasting views amongst you about crystals. So first of all, I will just say that my beliefs about crystals don't really match up with your average pagan or new age or witch ideas about what crystals are, what they can do, and their properties and that kind of thing. On the other hand, I wouldn't say that I go so far into the naturalistic camp as to say that I don't think they have any power at all, that they're just inanimate objects, you know, cold, dead, lifeless, what have you. I definitely wouldn't say that I only collect them because they're pretty, although that is definitely a pretty serious motivational factor. My beliefs about crystals, I suppose, pretty much fall into a kind of, I see them sort of as placebos. I do tend to sort of say, when I talk about crystals, I tend to kind of give a bit of a disclaimer and say I don't quote unquote believe in crystal healing in the traditional sense. It's not my belief that the crystal itself holds some inherent energy or properties that magically work with the human body in order to bring about a certain result. But that being said, I am a huge believer in the power of the placebo. Obviously, it's been scientifically documented. There's nothing uncertain about that. It is a real thing. It's a phenomenon that exists. And I think people can be a bit disparaging about it and kind of say, oh, well, it's just a placebo effect. I definitely don't see it as being just a placebo effect at all. I think the placebo effect is absolutely amazing. And that kind of psychology is, it has a lot to do with how I understand magic to work, and so on. So for me, while a certain crystal, I don't necessarily think that a certain crystal will have the same effect on everybody, for example, because I think it will probably have the effect on you that you expect it to have to some degree or another. Now, that being said, I don't actually use crystals for healing an awful lot in general, because despite the fact that obviously I know the placebo effect works, I think I have spent too long being really quite skeptical about crystal healing and just not being able to fully get on board with it. I spent quite a few years in my teenage years kind of trying to almost bully myself into believing in crystal healing and the magical properties of crystals. So I sort of almost talked myself out of believing that they had any sort of effect at all. So I kind of tend to not really use them so much in that way. That being said, when I am feeling particularly sick, I will probably pick up a crystal to play with. And it's not something that I really consciously think about a lot. I don't kind of... it's just something that I automatically find myself doing, because I do, you know, I have read a lot of books that talk about the properties of crystals. I have a lot of sort of knowledge that I have kind of absorbed into me through the pagan community about what various crystals are, and also just through their colours and their shapes and just the whole look and feel and vibe to them. I have developed sort of ideas about what they mean to me and how they feel to me, and they just make me feel good, essentially. Holding a crystal is just sort of a very comforting feeling for me, and I don't question that. I definitely, like I say, when I hold a crystal, I'm not imagining that there's something magical going on in the traditional sense, but it's not that there's nothing going on either. I am aware that it is having an effect on me. So yeah, I did say that I don't usually use crystals a huge amount for healing. Okay, you know, like I said, when I'm sick, I will often pick up my carnelian or my aventurine. Those are the two main crystals that I sort of feel like I feel a need for them, and I feel a need to hold them when I'm really not feeling well, particularly my carnelian. And this is a relatively new addition to my collection, but I absolutely love it. It just has this vibe to it. Something about the vibrant orange and with the white. It's got quite a lot of white on it. It's quite a light carnelian. And it just kind of makes me feel vibrant and energetic, so that's great. But most of all, I would say that I use my crystals as kind of spiritual props. I tend to like pick up a crystal when I'm meditating or in ritual. And again, I don't really do it in a very kind of premeditated kind of way. I don't really use crystals to perform what I would consider to be any kind of magic. I don't even really think a huge amount in advance about what the different properties of that crystal might be. I do it really largely intuitively, because that is just what fits best with my belief system about what they can do and that kind of thing. I will often just have crystals lying around on my altar, and this is more the case now that I've switched my altar around a bit. I have them kind of closer to hand now. And yeah, I will just sort of pick up a crystal if I just feel like I need it at that time, and just sort of get what I get out of it, and just, you know, pay attention to how it changes how I feel, how it changes the meditation and stuff like that. They're really potent symbolic items for me, I would say. I would say that after candles and maybe some very key items on my altars, the crystals kind of hold the most spiritual power for me. They are just hugely symbolic, and a lot of the time they will sort of sit on my altar as a sort of symbolic representation or almost an offering, without me necessarily actually actively working with them or actually doing anything with those crystals. A lot of the time they will just kind of stand in for, you know, certain things or represent certain things. So I think I'll just run through a couple and just let you know roughly. I have a couple that I tend to use for specific purposes, so I will just run through that. I will just say that the perspective is pretty skewed on this camera, so this stone here is quite small, and it looks not that much smaller than this one here, which is quite large. So just to give you an idea of perspective there, it's quite a wide angle lens, so it's giving you quite a skewed perspective. They all kind of look the same size, and they're not. I've got the small ones kind of to the front. So at the very front here I have a couple of rough stones that I haven't actually used a huge amount yet. This is some green calcite that I really like. I've got 2 bits of it here that I bought myself, but I haven't actually used that a huge amount yet. I do have vague ideas as to how I might use that. It's a very sort of witchy stone to me, despite the fact that I don't really use that word to describe myself. But yeah, that sort of, those and my small piece of smoky quartz, I really haven't used an awful lot yet. This is a tiny little clear quartz wand. And actually, hang on a minute, I'm going to refocus the camera so that you can actually see these things as I pick them up. Okay, there we go. So now you can better see these items. So that's the calcite, that's the smoky quartz. It's It's quite a dark one. Obviously it's not tumbled, so it's not very clear. So this is just a small quartz point. Again, haven't used it an awful lot. One thing I don't do at all is I don't use crystal grids. And again, this probably has a lot to do with the way that I view crystals, that I just don't see them as having necessarily any innate power in and of themselves. Their power for me lies in their connection to my psyche and how my psyche picks up on them and what they do in my psyche, how they make me, how I respond to them. I have toyed with the idea of creating crystal grids, you know, for that reason, to sort of create a certain response in my mind, but it's not something I've done an awful lot. These are two, now these are smaller, these are slightly larger than most of my tumbled stones, so I've taken them out for you to see. Sorry that the lighting isn't great. These are lepidolite, and I just really, really love these. I have a third one of these, but I actually have it in my parents' house on my altar there. And you really don't get an idea of the beauty of these, but I've really fallen in love with this stone, so I use those three quite a lot. Yes, this one I believe is usually on, this one's usually on my bedside table, with 2 pieces of amethyst and to kind of help me sleep. That is another of the very few ways in which I do actually use crystals in their more kind of traditional sense. And, you know, again, as a sort of placebo kind of tool. And I feel like that has worked for me. My problems with sleep are, as most people's are pretty much purely psychological. So any sort of psychological props that I can use to help me get a better night's sleep, fall asleep faster, I will use. Then this is a piece of black tourmaline, and it's just my favourite of the bunch. Again, these are just, as you can see, slightly larger tumble stones. I really like these sizes of tumbled stones. I tend to prefer larger stones, which is why I'm only really showing you my larger ones and not the small tumbled ones. I've kind of stopped buying them because I just find that they don't really speak to me very much. I am going to take an absolute age to go through them all if I go through them this slowly, so I'll speed up a bit. So then in the middle here we have 2 pieces of amethyst. This is a piece that I've had for over 10 years. I just picked it up in a shop in Dublin. This obviously is the larger cluster that I picked up in Edinburgh, which I really love. I picked it up for next to nothing in a shop that had a closing down sale, and most of the pieces that were left were quite small and not very exciting looking, but this piece just leapt out at me. It's really gorgeous. This is a piece of fluorite. This is another piece now that I haven't had a chance to work with a huge amount, but it's something that I will pick up when I am meditating and I'm having one of those kind of meditation experiences where I just can't settle, where my mind is racing, or just in general when I feel like there's a lot buzzing around in my head, I'm, you know, struggling to focus or kind of make a decision or feel like I'm going in the right direction and that kind of thing. The fluorite is something that I will pick up to sort of calm my nerves almost. This is a piece of crystal quartz. This is really old. It's actually gotten strangely kind of discoloured. I don't know enough about crystals to know why that is. It's kind of gone a bit yellow. I've had this for over 10 years as well. A friend of the family picked it up in her garden in Switzerland, and she gave it to me. She used to pick up quartz points all the time. I mean, it really is quite pretty. This is a piece of, well, mostly it's just a piece of rock, but it has opal in it. You're not going to be able to see that, hang on. I don't think I've much hope of showing you the opal on this, but take my word for it, it has kind of a strip of opal in the middle here, and I found that actually bits kind of flaked off the top after I played with it for a while. Anyway, that's something that my dad picked up. My dad is a geologist, so a couple of my rocks and bits and pieces are things that he has picked up on field trips when he's doing field work, essentially. The massive pieces of obsidian at the back, which I'm going to get to soon, is something that he picked up as well. And that and a couple of other things back in my parents' house, and actually my antler on my altar, if you're familiar with it, is another thing that he picked up in a field somewhere. So then we're getting into the back. We have my carnelian, which I've talked about, my green aventurine, my rose quartz. My rose quartz is something that I use a lot for tarot readings. This to me just feels like the stone to pick up and play with when I really want to get focused, really want to get kind of open up my heart chakra and really get kind of in tune with the other person's vibes, with what they're you know, asking me to think about and asking me to read on. and sort of just get me into the right headspace for reading tarot in general. I will also use it when I'm reading tarot for myself. I was never a big fan of rose quartz. I actually actively disliked it as a teenager. I don't know why I had this big thing about it, but I have, since I got this, I have just absolutely fallen in love with rose quartz, and I actually might pick up a few rough pieces as well. Generally speaking, I know that what you see here isn't very representative of that, but generally I actually prefer polished stones. I know a lot of people prefer rough stones, but my absolute favourite stones are my polished ones, and I just prefer them to handle. I just find them nicer. I can kind of just sort of mess with them in my hand more comfortably than a rough stone. I just find them easier to sort of get in tune with. Then at the back, I'll just mention quickly, I have a blue lace agate tree that a friend gave to me, oh gosh, more than 10 years ago. Maybe 12 years ago or something like that. At the time, she actually thought it was smoky quartz, and she gave it to me to alleviate depression and kind of issues like that I was going through at the time. And so I have always thought of blue lace agate as being a sort of stone that alleviates depression, and I think I have a small piece of it as well, but it's just not a stone I've worked with a huge amount. But I really love that. I still have that on my Ganesha altar because for me it fits in with that sort of removing obstacles and barriers and stuff like that. That's kind of the feeling that tree has always had for me. So now we're getting into kind of a more possibly more interesting section of the crystals, which are the crystals that I tend to work with in association with the Morrigan. And I'm going to just clear away a little bit of the other ones so I can focus more on those ones. So this piece of obsidian, black obsidian, which my dad picked up for me about, oh gosh, possibly as much as 20 years ago. It's pretty much my crowning glory when it comes to my collection of items that I associate with the Morrigan, items that I work with for her, items that I sort of have dedicated to her. It is a stone that I absolutely fell in love with when I got it at the time. It has a smooth face there, as is quite common with obsidian, and it's a bit rougher at the back, but even at the back it is quite smooth. So while, like I said, I tend to prefer tumbled stones, I really do like this one. It does have sharp edges, but apart from that it does have that smooth surface that I have always tended to sort of rub with my thumb. I've done very little scrying with it, strangely, because that's something that I always have said to myself that I will do with that stone. It just seems like the perfect thing to do with it, but scrying is not a huge part of my practice. Obsidian is a stone that I see widely associated with the Morrigan, but this was not a correspondence that I sort of came across in a book or heard anyone else talk about. It was something that came very organically to me. It was as though the part of me that loved this stone so much from such a young age was the part of me that was called to the Morrigan in the first place. And it just made perfect sense. And I suppose, you know, I can see why it is a stone that is so widely associated with her. But yes, it's very, very organic. The sort of fiery and fire mixed with earth kind of association. Well, it's actually a stone that is very much incorporates all of the elements, and the clashing of all those elements in a really violent but creative and equally sort of destructive way. Has an energy to it that is very, very similar to the Morrigan, and I just absolutely love that. I couldn't think of a stone that is more representative of her, and it even, you know, has the sort of edges to it. It almost looks like a man-made tool, which I like as well. It's just the way that the obsidian tends to break. It breaks off in those sort of shards. So the next stones that I got that I have been using for a long time to represent the Morrigan are my garnet. Now, this is not going to show very well on the camera. You're not going to be able to see the sort of dark blood red kind of colour to these, but they're absolutely beautiful. I got these from Hibiscus Moon back in the day when she used to sell sort of smaller tumbled stones and stuff on her Etsy shop. And I'm so glad I did. They're just wonderful. They're really, really gorgeous. And they're not huge, but they're, again, much bigger than your average tumbled stones. So I use these to represent her triple aspect. I'm not going to get into that in this video because I think that's a video in and of itself, and it's something that I've toyed with for a long time, trying to figure out for me what her triple aspect is about. And that's something I figured out recently, so I will talk about that in another video. Then I got this wonderful ammonite. I got this just kind of on a whim, and I was going to put it on my main altar as a sort of representation of cosmos and the sort of spiraling outwards kind of creative aspects of it and that kind of thing. But when I got it home, it just it really spoke to me of the Morrigan and her role as a creatrix. I feel like that's fairly explanatory, really. There's just a lot of wonderful associative symbolism with the spiral and with the ammonite in particular. It's just a kind of amazing link through time to an older time, and also a link that shows us how the same patterns and processes are happening all over cosmos at the same time. It's a symbol pretty close in importance to the Russian doll for me, or Matryoshka doll, or whatever way. It has various names from various different countries, I think. Funnily enough, despite the fact that I love them so much, I don't know an awful lot about them, the Russian dolls. But yeah, it's pretty up there, pretty high up there in importance for me in terms of spiritual symbols. So that has become kind of sacred to the Morrigan for me too. Now this bad boy is pretty brand new. You kind of get an idea there in the light of the kind of mottled kind of appearance of it. The colouring is sort of black with kind of a very dark red, almost purple, and with the flecks of white. Like I say, this is not like any onyx that I have ever seen, but that is what they say it is, so I will believe them when they say that. And it's mostly black, mostly a kind of black onyx. So yeah, I picked this up again, not necessarily thinking of the Morrigan, but I do have to say, when I picked it up, it was mostly her energy that I was kind of thinking of. But particularly the energy of the Bive, I think. And again, maybe that's something I'll get into more in another video. But I haven't actually left this on her altar because, like I say, it is something, maybe it's because I feel like I need its energy, particularly at the moment. I'm in a sort of transformative kind of stage, shedding a lot of old ideas and yeah, sort of definitely shifting. So I feel like the energy of this is just really potent for me right now. And now, again, like when I say the energy of it, I just want to restate this for clarity once more, that I don't necessarily mean that I think that the stone itself has an innate energy that I am kind of soaking up from the stone. It's more that when I touch it and when my consciousness interacts with this stone, it evokes a certain energy in me, which, to be honest, is largely the same thing in my mind. I don't see a huge amount of difference between those two ways of looking at it, but that just is the way that I understand it to be working and to be happening. So I think this is going to be really pivotal for me too in my relationship with the Morrigan. Yeah, it is something that I am just using generally. Often, even if I have a stone that I associate with a particular deity, I won't always use it just in devotion to that deity or while working to that deity. For example, my aventurine I very much associate with Ganesha, but gosh, it feels so light now after the onyx egg. But it is something that usually when I pick it up to play with it, I'm not necessarily thinking of Ganesha, which is odd. And I think it's kind of similar with this egg, even though I definitely associate it with the Morrigan and particularly with Bive. When I pick it up, it just sort of has an energy in and of itself, and it just links in with my emotions and what I'm feeling at the moment, and ties me into a particular kind of meditative experience and that kind of thing. But I would like to get more in the habit of associating certain crystals with certain deities, and maybe kind of offering them more formally to those deities, and then seeing if that then kind of creates a more kind of formal connection for me between the deity and the crystal, so that when I use that crystal or pick it up, that I am sort of instantaneously plugged into that particular deity. And that is something that I would like to work with in the future. But my workings with personified deity, it's sort of like a gradual process. I am very gradually, very slowly working up my practice with that. So I think crystals are going to be quite central to that, but it's just something that is only like slowly coming into being, and this egg might actually be instrumental to that. I'm really, really loving this. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Oh, I suppose I'll just show you my bowl of crystals. Again, there are a few more. There are a few more in my parents' house. The chrysocolla is one of the only ones. Oh, and the rhodonite are some of the only ones that I don't actually have large pieces of. Oh no, I lied. There's labradorite. Okay, I lied. There's all sorts of things in here that I don't have larger versions of. I do have blue lace agate, moonstone. There's some more rose quartz in there. Yeah, various bits and pieces. So I don't actually use these a whole lot, but I will sort of set them out on my altar if I am doing a working, which I don't do an awful lot. I will sort of set them out and, sorry, that was just me banging against something. I will sort of set them out and use them for that, but that's another thing that I'm kind of working towards, that I haven't really used an awful lot. More often I will use small tumble stones to just leave around the room in various places as sort of mental triggers. Like I say that I use the, actually you might see these better here, the lepidolite for sleep and calming myself down and relaxing, that kind of thing. Haven't needed them so much in recent years, which is good, because I've been more relaxed. So yeah, I tend to sort of take out certain stones at certain times and just leave them in kind of the relevant places as sort of triggers, and that is the main way that I would use my small tumble stones. But I'm thinking of using them as a form of sort of divination. Monsoon Magic made a video about this just the other night, and I'll post a link about that in the description box below because I found it very interesting. She has a slightly unique method that I haven't seen before anyway. I'm not exactly sure where she got it from or if she came up with it herself. And I'd like to try that with these stones because a lot of them I just don't really use them at all very much, and it would be nice to use them more. I definitely favour my larger stones for working with. So I better leave it there because I'm running out of battery in a serious way. But I hope this is interesting. It's something I haven't touched on before, so yeah, I hope I hit on all the points that I meant to, and yeah, I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and if you have anything that you want me to address further in a later video, I will do so. Talk to you again soon, guys.